כמה שבועות קמו שתיים שחושבים את עצמם חכמים גדולים. פתחתם חשבון עם כל יהודי ויהודי, אז נגד כולם פתחתם חזית. הדלקתם אש לא קטנה, לכבות אותה? אי אפשר. אם הם ימשיכו לעשות את זה, הם יעוררו תגובות שהם לא מדמיינים לעצמם. אין סוף לעונש של מי שמטעה, מי שמסית ומדיח עונשו של כל אחד ואחד, כמו שאותו יימח שמו, אותו אחד מייסד הנצרות, אותו אחד מה שקורה איתו למעלה, עכשיו נאמר את הגמרא בגיטין ונזל, נאמר שם הגמרא, דנים אותו בצואה רותחת, חבילה של צואה, של פסולת שיוצא מהקיבה של בני האדם, וחתולים וכלבים ואריות ונמרים, רותחת, מבעבעת, שם שמים אותו, שם הוא נענש לרקו רגע. זה קרה, את זה לא הבאתם, כל הכנסיות, כל הצלבים שלהם, הצלב הגדול הזה על ChiRho בברזיל, מתפוצץ לרסיסים, לכל העולם, וכולם יראו את זה. אבל להוציא את השקר של כולם החוצה, את השקר של הנצרות הזאת החוצה, שבשם כביכול בורא עולם, בשם כביכול יש לו כתפיים רחבות, הוא לוקח את העוונות של כולם, את העוונות של כולם הוא ייקח, שום דבר, כולכם תהיו נקיים, כולכם תבואו לשלטם של גן עדן. איזה שטויות, כמה דפר בן אדם יכול להיות, כמה סתום בלום, כמה דביל ומפגר, אין מילים אחרות, בן אדם יכול להיות בשביל להאמין לשטות המפגרת הזאת.
The Jewish Religion, Its Influence Today, by Elizabeth Dilling. Chapter 3, The Talmud and Bible Believers. The supreme hatred of Talmudic Judaism is reserved for and directed against the hated adherers to the text of Scripture, who are thus accused of spurning the words of the Pharisees, the sages, as enshrined in the Babylonian Talmud. These adherers to the Bible are classified as the primary enemies of Judaism. They are all idolators, heathen, goy. They rank not only as animals like the rest of the non-Jewish human race, but as the lowest and most despised form of life. The Talmud frequently refers to Bible adherents scathingly as Samaritans and Kuthians, phraseology similar used to excoriate Christians. The Sadducees were the first of these enemies. They were the constant opponents of the Pharisees and their imported Babylonian paganism, misrepresented by the Pharisees as the tradition of the elders, the oral law, ostensibly transmitted privately to Moses and on down, superseding anything written in the Bible. In the 6 years of civil war between the Pharisees and Alexander Jannaeus, king and high priest of Jerusalem, 50,000 were killed on both sides before the Sadducean ruler succumbed, and his widow Salome turned affairs over to the Pharisees in 79 BC. Her brother, Simon ben Shattah, had been waiting for such an opportunity. The continued civil war resulted in the sons of Alexander Jannaeus, Hyrcanus, and Aristobulus in 63 BC, going hat in hand to Pompey, Caesar's Roman general in Syria, asking him to invade Palestine and slaughter their respective opponents. This is how Rome happened to be in power when Christ was born. Only after Christ's ascension did the Pharisees triumph. Other enemies have been the Samaritans, whom our Lord seemed to favor. They had been brought in from Cutha and other far places in the world, Assyrian Empire, to take the place of the 10 Israel tribes deported in 721 BC. They had adopted biblical Judaism and opposed the return from Babylon in 536 BC of the Pharisee-run population. Each year, a handful of Samaritans celebrate Passover on the site of their former temple at Mount Gerizim, an event contemptuously referred to by American Jewish writers. The Karaites in the 8th century in Babylonia under Anan to plague the Pharisee top element by scorning the Talmud and holding up the Bible as supreme authority. A molten stream of hatred, therefore, was turned on them. With true Talmudic brotherhood and tolerance, Anan was expelled from Babylonia and founded the Karaite sect in Jerusalem. Later, when the few remaining thousands of Karaites were favored by the Tsar of Russia, although classed as untouchables by the Talmudists, the latter offered to join the Karaites to get immunity from the Tsarist displeasure, but the Karaites turned them down as hypocrites. The supreme curses the Karaites have shared with Christians are due to the adherence of the Karaites to the Bible, instead of the sages or Jewish Talmud. They are likened to the Sadducees and the Samaritans in this. Title: Talmudic Anti-Christianity. The ultimate object of hatred in Talmudic Judaism is Christ, and the targets of Talmudic hatred are not just Gentile non-Jews. Quote, the people who are like an ass, slaves who are considered the property of the master. End quote. Found in Talmud, Kethaboth 111a. Of these non-Jews, the Christians are most insanely hated and loathed because their doctrines are the opposite of every Talmudic doctrine. They rank not just as animals, like the rest of the non-Talmudic humanity, but almost as vermin to be eradicated. Language in the Talmud is virtually exhausted to find foul and hated names for Christians. Min, spelled M-I-N, plural for minim, is used throughout the Talmud as a term to designate Christians. In the Shemoneh Esrei, or 18 benedictions, the word has been changed from time to time as wary non-Jews become aware of its meaning. This reference can be found on the website on Exhibit 284. That is referenced in the description. In the right column of the same Exhibit 284, we see Epicureans substituted by Maimonides, a Talmudic pillar. Reference is made to uncensored Talmud editions of Barakoth 28b. The Barakoth statement reads, quote, the benediction relating to the Minim, Christians, was instituted in Jebna, Palestine, after the rest, end quote. The Harangu goes on to decree vengeance against anyone leaving out the benediction against the Minim, quote, because we suspect him of being men, end quote. Quote, the censored have Mumar, end quote, says the exhibit from the Jewish Encyclopedia instead of Minim. And in Sanhedrin 27a, Mumar is used to denounce as wholly disqualified one who eats meat which is not slaughtered in kosher manner, thus showing, quote, his contempt for the law, end quote. The Talmud Gittin 45b reference states that, quote, a scroll of the law which has been written by a man should be burnt, end quote. Distilled hate is the theme. The Horioth 11a citation from the Talmud, page 79 of the Sonsino edition, is another tirade against those who rank below common people, the Minim. It cites those who drink wine dedicated to an idol, referring to Holy Communion. Christ is always the idol, denounced by the Talmud, while real idolatry in regard to spirits, planets, child burning to Moloch, Baal filth, are permitted in Judaism. Present-day Jews keep up a continual propaganda that burning anti-Christian, immoral, or subversive books is the depth of bigotry, bias, and intolerance. But the teaching in Sabbath 111a of the Talmud is even cited in the Jewish Encyclopedia under the Gentiles, which holds that Christian books should be burned without regard to the name of God appearing therein. Characteristic of charging as a crime against others with, what Talmudists themselves are doing, a Sanhedrin passage denounces Christ as a sorcerer. It was to refute this Talmudic teaching of hate against Christ that Martin Luther wrote his Shaman Hophorus on the charge that Christ did his miracles by sorcery, using the Tetragrammaton, which in some Talmud passages he is said to have stolen and hidden in his flesh. In John 8:44 in the Bible, Christ was amazingly correct in designating the Talmudic Pharisees as children of the father of lies. Title: Christianity Calls from Hell. Christianity is likened in the Talmud to go one of two daughters of a horse leech calling from hell. Bring, bring. One is the government, which constantly imposes fresh taxes and duties, and the other, Mineth, Christianity, which continually lures the unwary to its erroneous teaching. A biblical verse is then misused as a curse, applied to those converted to idolatry, referring to Christianity. Then another says the voice of hell is calling to bring these two daughters, who cry and call in this world, back to hell. Title: Incest Preferable to Christianity. The Talmud speaks of a woman who confessed that her young son was the offspring of her older son, and that incest was her lightest sin, and wanted to die in peace, but could not. For if incest was her lightest sin, it may be assumed that she had also adopted Mineth, Christianity. That is why she did not die, since she said of her guilt that is one of the lightest. It may be assumed that she was guilty of idolatry also. A tale follows about a rabbi who visited every harlot in the world, crossing 7 rivers to get the last one. He is allowed to die in peace because he had not committed the unforgivable Mineth, Christianity. This is found in the Talmud, Abodah Zarah 17a. Title: Death from snake bite preferable. The Talmud says that Rabbi Ishmael, a sage, has a nephew who is bitten by a snake and wants to let Jacob, a disciple of Jesus, heal him, but dies in the middle of the sentence. The rabbi thereupon exclaims, "Happy art thou, Ben Dama, for thou wert pure in body, and thy soul likewise left thee in purity." His joy was because, of course, it was preferable to die of snake bite than to be healed by a Christian. This is found in the Talmud in Abodah Zarah 27b. Title: Jesus and the High Priest Privy. The Talmud tale is told that because of talking to a Christian disciple of Jesus, a rabbi is suspected of being pro-Christian, which makes him deeply ashamed. He tells the lie that Jesus taught that the hire of a harlot may be used to build a privy for the high priest. Found in the Talmud Abodah Zarah 16b through 17a. This last pleased the rabbi very much, he says. This filthy and false story to defame Christ is used in a typical Pharisee lie by Rabbi Louis Finkelstein in his publication, The Pharisees. Any epithets directed at Pharisaism by Christians in the early centuries, Finkelstein ascribes to conflict between Christians and their former comrades who continued loyal to unaltered Pharisaism. Nevertheless, the Pharisee and the Christian remained sufficiently close to regard one another with respect. Then the above Rabbi Eliezer lie is used as a compliment. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, one of the most orthodox of the sages, offered high praise to an interpretation of Scripture given by an early Christian. This is also found in Avodah Zarah 17a. This is the self-same libel on Christ. Title: More Lies to Fool Us. At the time the Jewish Encyclopedia was published in 1905, there was no English translation of the Talmud with identifying folio numbers. The first by Rodkinson in 1903 was not only abridged, but also without folio numbers. Only with the relatively recent Sonsino English translation of the Talmud do we have folio numbers and overt unmistakable references which require no argument or interpretations for non-Jews. However, in 1905, lies concerning the Talmud were quite safe from prying non-Jewish eyes. The 1905 Jewish Encyclopedia states, during the first century of Christianity, the rabbis lived on friendly terms with the minim. Once again, these are referring to the Christians. Anyone familiar with the liquid fire turned on Pharisaism by Christ in the New Testament is not fooled by this. However, to buttress this lie, the above false privy tale attributed to Jesus is told as though it indicated friendliness. Concerning the above anti-Christian snakebite story from the Talmud, the encyclopedia then states, quote, Ben Dama, a nephew of Rabbi Ishmael, having been bitten by a snake, allowed himself to be cured by means of an exorcism uttered by the man Jacob, a Judeo-Christian. End quote. Does not this one series of circumstances once again illustrate how amazingly correct Christ was in designating the Pharisees as children of the father of lies? Title: Jesus knew the Talmud. Rodkinson, who made the first English translation of the Babylonian Talmud, asks in the section on the history of the Talmud, page 14, quote, is the literature that Jesus was familiar with in his early years yet in existence in the world? Is it possible for us to get at it? To such inquiries, the learned class of Jewish rabbis answered by holding up the Talmud. The Talmud, then, is the written form of that which, in the time of Jesus, was called the traditions of the elders, and to which he makes frequent allusions. End quote. Title: The Talmud and Mary, Mother of Jesus. She is called Miriam, a dresser of women's hair. She committed adultery. This statement is found in Exhibit 75 on the website. She played the harlot with carpenters. This quote can be found in Exhibit 114 on the website. All rabbinical sources ascribe to Jesus illegitimate birth. The seducer was a soldier by the name of Panthera, also called Pandora and Stada. Pappus, husband of Mary, has nothing to do with the story of Jesus, and was only connected with it because his wife happened to be called Miriam, and was known to be an adulteress. End quote. All the Life of Jesus editions contain a similar story of a dispute which Jesus carried on with the scribes, who on the ground of that dispute declared him to be a bastard. Title: Christ as Balaam. Under the name of Balaam, the most lewd Talmud passages concerning Jesus appear. Proof that Jesus is called Balaam is found in the Jewish Encyclopedia under Balaam, which, after enumerating his alleged loathsome qualities, states, hence the pseudonym Balaam given to Jesus in Sanhedrin 106b and Gittin 57a. These are books of the Talmud. In the same article, we are told that the Talmud likens the gospel Christians and Christ to Baal sex worshippers, because of whose abominations 24,000 Israelites died of plague at the time of Balaam. This is found in Numbers 25, 1-9. Because Balaam had been asked to curse the Israelites, but instead did not, and foretold the coming Messiah, found in Numbers 24:17, the flimsy pretext is made that Jesus was a curse like Balaam. He is pictured as blind of one eye and lame in one foot, and his disciples distinguished by 3 morally corrupt qualities. He is called one that ruined a people, and his churches are likened to nudist Baal worship. And this hostility against his memory finds its climax in the dictum that whenever one discovers a feature of wickedness or disgrace in his life, one should preach about it. These concepts and quotes can be found in Sanhedrin 106b. Turning to Exhibit 114, that can be found on the website, which is Sanhedrin 106a through 106b of the Talmud. Mentioned above, we see the likening of Jesus to the supposed act of Balaam in causing 24,000 Israelites to go whoring and die of plague, some 1,450 years before Christ was born. He is due for his reward for this infamy. His mother Mary is she who played the harlot with carpenters. They subjected him to 4 deaths: stoning, burning, decapitation, and strangulation. He was 33 or 34 years old. Another says, I have been Balaam's chronicle, in which it stated, Balaam the lame was 30 years old when Phinehas the robber killed him. The footnote explains, quote, the Balaam is frequently used in the Talmud as a type for Jesus. The mother of Jesus is identified, the 4 deaths enumerated, and all the Balaam passages are anti-Christian in tendency, Balaam being used as an alias for Jesus. Phinehas the robber is thus taken to represent Pontius Pilate, and the chronicle of Balaam probably to denote a gospel. End quote. Verifying the Jewish Encyclopedia account above on Balaam being Jesus in the Talmud, we see in the case of the wicked Balaam, whatever you find written about him, lecture upon it to his disadvantage. Christian churches are likened to tents for Baal prostitution, with old women outside, young ones inside to get customers drunk and disrobe and worship the idol, Jesus, in Baal manner by prostitution. Hanging a calumny on the brief mention in the Bible that Balaam was slain in Numbers 32:8. The above passage in Sanhedrin is cited by the Jewish Encyclopedia thus, in the process of killing Balaam, all 4 legal methods of execution, stoning, burning, decapitating, and strangulating, were employed. He met his death at the age of 33, and it is stated that he had no portion in the world to come. Sanhedrin 90a of the Talmud denying Balaam a place in the world to come begins with Exhibit 96, which can be found on the website herein. There it is stated that the resurrection being denied by the Sadducees and Samaritans. Quote, it was to oppose these that the doctrine was emphatically asserted in the second of the 18 benedictions. The sin of pronouncing the Tetragrammaton is cited against Christ and Christians. End quote. The curse of Christians as those who pronounce the name as spelt Tetragrammaton and read uncanonical books begins with a Mishnah. Vague meanderings to throw off a possible Christian reader appear in the footnotes, with a hint that the uncanonical books may mean this or that, but there are indications, however, that something more is meant. But the footnote to uncanonical books, still being discussed 68 pages later, overtly reveals that the reference is to the New Testament, and that the word Sadducees is used to indicate Gentiles. Title: The 18 Benedictions. The religious Orthodox Jew recites the 18 Benedictions, or Shemoneh Esrei, 3 times weekdays, 4 times on holidays and Sabbaths, the 7th and 12th of which curse the Christians and non-Jews to hell and perdition. Thus, the good Orthodox Jew gives us Christians 6 cursings on ordinary days, 8 on specials. Note all the varieties of double talk which have been utilized down the centuries to keep the truth about the Shemoneh Esrei from the non-Jews, who might not be friendly to those who recite this brotherhood litany religiously 6 to 8 times daily. Note, in order to obviate hostile misconstructions, the text was modified, and one change after another to fool the non-Jew is enumerated. The 12th benediction, the Birkat Hominim, which means curse against Christians, furnished the traducers of Judaism and the Jews' ready weapon of attack. This petition against enemies of the non-Jews is called an imprecatori appeal. Imprecatori means, of course, invoking evil, a curse. It is further stated by the cautious Jewish Encyclopedia. The 7th benediction looks like a duplication and is superfluous. The Jewish Encyclopedia also cites a recommendation by the sages for daily recitation of the benediction. Blessed be thou who hast not made me a goy. In the Talmud, the Christian is also planted in hell for eternity under a deluge of boiling excrement if opposing Judaism. Found in the Talmud in Book Gittin 57a, quote, "Whoever mocks the words of the sages is punished with boiling hot excrement," end quote. On the same page, where the ordinary Christian gets his eternal fate, Christ is similarly punished forever in hell with boiling semen. Title: The Talmud, 5 Deaths to Jesus. Jesus, as stated in both the Talmud and Jewish Encyclopedia, gets 4 legal methods of execution and is crucified as well, as a blasphemer of Pharisee Judaism. Jesus stoned, then hanged or crucified, found in Sanhedrin 43a through 45b. Sanhedrin 67a, where under another phony name, Ben Stada, Jesus is identified as Jesus of Nazareth. As to Judas, we are told that when Judas found he could not touch Jesus in any way in aerial battle, he defiled him. This is known as the privy concept, once again, which runs through the Talmud. Jesus' apostles all killed, found in Sanhedrin 43a and b. Their names are decoded by Jewish Encyclopedia. Again, I encourage anyone listening to this to check out the website in the description. There are many exhibited numbers that give resources and routes to see these references. Jesus crucified as a blasphemer in Sanhedrin 46a. Jesus burned, Sanhedrin 52a, manner of burning, found in Yebamoth 6b, verified by Jewish Encyclopedia under Balaam. He is lowered into dung up to his armpits. Then a hard cloth was placed within a soft one, wound round his neck, and the two loose ends pulled in opposite directions, forcing him to open his mouth. A wick was then lit and thrown into his mouth, so that it descended into his body and burned his bowels. His mouth was forced open with pincers against his wishes, and the death penalty of burning was executed by pouring molten lead through the condemned man's mouth into his body, burning his internal organs. Jesus strangled. He was lowered into dung up to his armpits. Then a hard cloth was placed within a soft one, wound round his neck, and the two ends pulled in opposite directions until he was dead. This is found in the Talmud, Sanhedrin 52a. This is repeated in Sanhedrin 106b and verified by the Jewish Encyclopedia. Jesus in hell, where his punishment is boiling in hot semen, is found in the Talmud in the book Gittin 57a. The subject is identified as Jesus in a footnote, also in the Jewish Encyclopedia under Balaam, or the name Balaam. Christians in hell, in the above passage, are punished by boiling hot excrement, which is the punishment for all who mock at the words of the sages. Jesus, as told in the Talmud book Sanhedrin 105a, committed bestiality, corrupted the people, and is turned to hell. Jesus limped on one foot and was blind in one eye. He practiced enchantment by means of his membrum. He committed bestiality with his ass. He was a fool who did not even know his beast's mind. These are concepts found in the Talmud, Sanhedrin 105a through 105b. The ridiculous and foul misuse of the passage of the Bible, Judges 5:27, about Sisera's dying convulsions, meaning sexual intercourse, is here applied to Jesus with a footnote explanation of Judges 5:27. This is taken to mean sexual intercourse. Jesus' attempts to seduce women is excommunicated by a rabbi and then worships a brick, was a seducer of Israel, and practiced magic. These concepts can be found in the Talmud, Sanhedrin 107b. Jesus is cited in the index of the Sanhedrin portion of the Talmud, the chief repository of the criminal law of the Talmud, which shows the page numbers where he is denounced. Jesus' resurrection is cursed. Woe unto him who maketh himself alive by the name of God. This is found in the Talmud, Sanhedrin 106a. The trial of Jesus. It was by the action of the priest that Jesus was sent before Pontius Pilate. The Sanhedrin priest had most reason to be offended with Jesus' action in cleansing the temple, the probable place of his trial, according to the Talmud. His cry, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" was in all its implications itself a disproof of the exaggerated claims made for him. The very form of his punishment would disprove these claims in Jewish eyes. No Messiah that Jews could recognize could suffer such a death, for he that is hanged is accursed of God. This refers to an evil son, and Talmudist Rashi adds, an insult to God. The foregoing is from the Jewish Encyclopedia under Jesus. Other foul charges against Jesus and his mother, his being a bastard, and the like, follow Exhibit 277 from the same encyclopedia. Again, I highly encourage anyone to visit the actual website I am reading from to check out the sources which they are being extracted. Thank you for listening.